Kenya is often spoken of as a peaceful nation, a calm oasis in a region that has seen decades of conflict, political turmoil, and instability. When people visit or read about East Africa, Kenya frequently stands out as the country where things seem to work, where institutions still function, where the economy moves forward, and where society appears, at least from the outside, to be holding together. It is a country that has grown to represent stability, a place where the world sends its diplomats, where major companies open regional offices, and where millions of tourists travel every year in search of breathtaking landscapes and friendly people. Over time, Kenya's identity as a peaceful nation became not just an observation but a brand, one that influences how the world sees it and how Kenyans see themselves. But this reputation did not emerge overnight. It was shaped layer by history, geography, politics, and the unique role Kenya plays in the region. For many years, the countries surrounding Kenya have faced deep struggles. Somalia dealt with decades of civil war and continues to face threats from extremist groups. South Sudan, the world's youngest country, has been rocked by internal fighting almost from the moment it gained independence. Ethiopia, long viewed as a strong regional power, has battled ethnic tensions and conflicts that sometimes spill over its borders. Through all of this, Kenya has managed to avoid collapsing into a full-scale national war, and in a region where stability is rare, even simply holding together is seen as an achievement. This contrast created the first foundation of Kenya's peaceful reputation, the belief that, at least Kenya is better than its neighbors. It is a perception that has been repeated in academic reports, travel advisories, diplomatic discussions, and international conferences. Because Kenya did not face the same level of war and destruction as others in the region, it naturally became the country that outsiders pointed to as stable. And that reputation soon began to influence every industry, every sector, and even Kenya's role on the global stage. Economically, Kenya positioned itself as East Africa's financial heart. Banks, tech startups, manufacturing companies, and foreign investors flocked to Nairobi. The city grew rapidly, becoming a melting pot of cultures, businesses, and global institutions. As the economy expanded, it reinforced the idea that peace and stability were part of what made Kenya successful. People believed and still believe that investors prefer peaceful environments. The success of the Kenyan economy became evidence that the country must be safer and more stable than many others across the continent. Tourism also played an important role in building Kenya's peaceful image. For decades, visitors from across the world have traveled into the Masai Mara, Amboseli, Tsavo, the Kenyan coast, and other destinations. Tourists rarely visit countries they consider dangerous, and their willingness to choose Kenya strengthened the belief that the country was not only beautiful but also peaceful. Images of smiling locals, wildlife safaris, sandy beaches, and cultural dances became the global picture of Kenya, colorful, warm, and inviting. Behind those images was the quiet assumption that Kenya was a safe place to explore. On top of that, Kenya became a center for humanitarian and diplomatic activities. Dadaab and Kakuma refugee camps grew into some of the largest in the world, hosting people fleeing wars in Somalia, Sudan, Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, and DR Congo. Kenya became a refuge for those escaping violence, and for the international community, a country that shelters victims of conflict is often seen as peaceful itself. Kenya also played mediator in peace negotiations across the region, helping in talks related to Sudan, Somalia, and DR Congo. The idea that Kenya helps bring peace to others made many believe it must be peaceful at home. International media contributed to shaping this reputation too. Over the years, global news outlets frequently highlighted Kenya as a stable nation in a turbulent part of the world. When journalists covered East Africa, they often used Kenya as the symbol of progress, featuring Nairobi's modern skyline, expanding infrastructure, and large international forums hosted in the country. This media portrayal spread around the world and, slowly, the message became deeply rooted. Kenya is peaceful. But reputations can sometimes create illusions, pictures that are true in some ways and misleading in others. Beneath Kenya's calm surface lies a more complex story, one shaped by political tensions, periodic outbreaks of violence, protests, terrorist attacks, and regional pressures that continue to challenge its stability. Kenya may appear peaceful to outsiders, but peace is not just the absence of war. Peace is also about freedom, security, justice, and the everyday experiences of ordinary people. And this is where the real question begins. Is Kenya genuinely peaceful, or has it been compared so often to countries in crisis that we have stopped looking closely at its internal struggles? Does Kenya's reputation represent reality, or has it become a comforting narrative that hides deeper issues? To find out, we must go beyond the surface and look at what really defines peace. Political stability, social cohesion, security, protests, terrorism threats, economic stress, and the power dynamics within government institutions. Only by examining these factors and comparing them to other African nations can we understand whether Kenya truly stands out as a peaceful country, or whether its reputation is merely one part of a much larger, more complicated story. To understand whether Kenya is truly peaceful, we must begin by looking at its political stability, especially during elections, because in Kenya, elections are not just political events. They are emotional, tense, and sometimes life-changing moments that shake the entire country. Every 5 years, Kenya seems to pause and hold its breath, waiting to see which direction the nation will move. And oddly enough, this uncertainty has become a defining feature of Kenya's political life. While many African countries also experience election tensions, Kenya's election cycle has a unique character, shaped by history, ethnicity, and the intense competition for power. Politics in Kenya has always carried a level of emotion that is hard to ignore. Supporters are passionate, leaders are influential, and communities often see elections as battles for survival rather than simple democratic processes. This deep emotional connection to politics can create instability, especially when results are disputed. The most painful example came in 2007, when a disputed presidential election triggered violence that spread across the country, leaving over 1,000 people dead and hundreds of thousands displaced. That moment shocked the world and shattered the old belief that Kenya was immune to internal conflict. It showed that beneath Kenya's calm exterior, there were unresolved tensions around inequality, land, historical injustices, and ethnic divisions, issues that still influence politics today. Since then, every election has carried a sense of anxiety. The 2013 and 2017 elections were more peaceful than 2007, but they were still accompanied by fear, heavy security presence, and scattered clashes. Kenyans often describe the election season as a time when people just want voting to end quickly, because no one truly knows how things might unfold. Families stock up on food, some travel away from major towns, and businesses close early. Even though Kenya tries to maintain peace, the uncertainty itself becomes a form of instability. When we compare this to other African countries, a picture begins to form. Tanzania, for example, has historically been calmer during elections, with lower chances of widespread violence, though recent years have seen growing tensions. Uganda, on the other hand, struggles with pre-election intimidation, arrests of opposition figures, and heavy security crackdowns that create a different kind of instability, one where peace is maintained through force rather than consensus. Rwanda is extremely peaceful during elections, but its peace is tightly controlled, leaving little room for open political competition. West African nations like Ghana have built a strong democratic culture with peaceful transitions of power, while others like Nigeria and Côte d'Ivoire have faced serious outbreaks of election violence. In this wide spectrum, Kenya falls somewhere in the middle, not as peaceful as the countries celebrated for smooth democratic transitions, but not as volatile as nations where elections almost always trigger serious conflict. What makes Kenya unique is the balance it tries to maintain between vibrant democracy and deep-rooted divisions. Kenya has one of the most energetic political scenes in Africa. Citizens openly debate politics, criticize leaders, and participate in campaigns with passion. This openness is a sign of a mature democracy, yet it also exposes the underlying fractures that appear whenever competition becomes too intense. Unlike countries where elections are heavily controlled, Kenya allows political expression, which is healthy, but political expression can be unpredictable, and unpredictable energy sometimes turns into unrest. In recent years, protests have become a regular part of Kenya's political landscape, Demonstrations over election results, the cost of living, corruption, and government decisions often unfold in the streets of Nairobi, Kisumu, Mombasa, Eldoret, and other cities. Most protests start peacefully but can quickly escalate when police intervene. Tear gas, running battles, and road blockages have become familiar scenes during politically charged moments. These incidents raise an important question. Can a country truly be called peaceful if citizens frequently clash with law enforcement, or if political disagreements spill into the streets? Even so, Kenya remains far from the kinds of violent political crises seen in countries like Sudan or Mali, where coups and full-scale military takeovers occur. Kenya has never experienced a coup in its independent history, which is rare on the African continent. Many African nations, from Burkina Faso to Guinea, Niger, Chad, and Zimbabwe, have gone through military takeovers that completely disrupted governance and national stability. Kenya, despite its challenges, has always maintained constitutional continuity. Leaders change through elections, not armed rebellions. This alone sets Kenya apart from several other African countries that struggle with frequent power disruptions. But political peace is not just about avoiding coups. It is also about how leaders respond to disagreements, how citizens express their frustrations, and whether institutions can resolve disputes fairly. Kenya has made progress, establishing courts and commissions to handle election petitions and strengthening its constitution after 2010. Yet trust in institutions remains fragile. Many Kenyans feel that powerful people are rarely held accountable, and this lack of trust makes every election feel risky. People worry that results can be manipulated or that justice will not be served if things go wrong. At the same time, political alliances in Kenya tend to shift unexpectedly, making the landscape unpredictable. Today's enemies become tomorrow's partners, and yesterday's rivals join hands for the sake of power. These sudden changes sometimes calm the nation and sometimes confuse it. When leaders unite, tensions drop. When they split, the divisions widen. This constant movement keeps Kenya politically alive, but also politically unstable beneath the surface. So, when we evaluate Kenya's peace through the lens of political stability, the picture is mixed. Kenya is not a war-torn nation. It does not experience the coups and total collapses seen elsewhere. Its political system, despite its imperfections, remains functional. Yet Kenya is also a country where emotions run high, where elections create fear, where protests erupt, and where trust in political institutions is often questioned. Compared to Africa's most peaceful democracies, Kenya still struggles with political tension. Compared to countries in deeper turmoil, Kenya stands strong. And it is within this balance, between calm and uncertainty, that Kenya's political story continues to unfold. To understand Kenya's claim to peace, we must also look closely at its security situation, because peace is not only shaped by politics but also by how safe people feel in their daily lives. And when we talk about safety in Kenya, one issue instantly stands out: the threat of terrorism. For more than 2 decades, Kenya has been at the center of a difficult fight against extremist groups, especially Al-Shabaab. This challenge has shaped the country's internal security, influenced government policies, and affected how citizens think about safety. The story begins in the 1990s, when Kenya experienced one of its earliest major attacks, the 1998 bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi. The explosion shook the entire city and left deep scars, both physical and emotional. Years later, the 2013 Westgate Mall attack shocked the world once again, as armed militants stormed one of Nairobi's most popular shopping centers. The images of frightened families, trapped shoppers, and tense rescue missions became a painful memory etched into Kenya's history. And just when the country was healing, the 2015 Garissa University attack struck with brutality, targeting innocent students. These events changed how Kenyans viewed peace. It was no longer just about avoiding civil war or political collapse, but also about confronting external threats that could emerge at any moment. Despite these tragedies, Kenya refused to surrender to fear. The country strengthened its intelligence services, improved coordination between police and military, and increased surveillance in vulnerable areas. Security forces became more visible on the streets, especially in Nairobi and along the coastline. Many African countries face terrorist threats, but few have had to respond as actively and consistently as Kenya. Nigeria struggles with Boko Haram and ISWAP in the northeast. Mali and Burkina Faso have seen entire regions fall under extremist control. Somalia continues to be the root of al-Shabaab's activities. In contrast, Kenya, while affected, has avoided being overwhelmed by these groups. Attacks still occur, especially near the border regions of Garissa, Wajir, and Mandera. But Kenya's larger cities have remained relatively secure compared to what is happening elsewhere on the continent. Even so, the presence of terrorism risks creates a unique type of tension in Kenya. People sometimes feel safe and unsafe at the same time. Safe because life goes on, but uneasy because they know the threat isn't entirely gone. Security checkpoints at malls, metal detectors, sniffer dogs, bag searches, and armed guards have become a normal part of Kenyan life. These measures help prevent attacks, but they also serve as daily reminders that peace here is not guaranteed. It must be constantly protected. Beyond terrorism, Kenya faces internal security challenges that shape how peaceful the country truly is. Crime in urban areas, especially in Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, and Nakuru, remains a concern. Neighborhoods like Eastleigh, Kayole, Mathar, Kisani, and parts of Nakuru East have gained reputations as hotspots for robberies or gang activity. Many Kenyans know the experience of hearing about a mugging, a phone snatching, or a burglary in their area. It doesn't always make headlines, but it affects the quiet rhythm of daily life. People avoid walking in some areas at night, guard their phones closely in public, and prefer using taxis after certain hours. These habits say something important. Safety in Kenya depends heavily on where you live, what time it is, and how alert you are. But this is not unique to Kenya. South Africa battles some of the highest crime rates in the world, with carjackings, violent robberies, and gang violence deeply rooted in some cities. Nigeria grapples with kidnappings for ransom, especially in the north. DR Congo deals with armed militias controlling rural areas. Even otherwise peaceful countries like Ghana, Senegal, and Botswana face spikes in urban crime. In this context, Kenya falls somewhere in the middle, neither the safest nor the most dangerous. People live their lives normally, commute, work, and study, but they do so with an awareness that security can shift quickly. Another layer of Kenya's security story lies in the northern and coastal regions, where historical marginalization and geographic isolation have created long-standing tensions. Cattle rustling, banditry, and clan clashes in areas like Turkana, Baringo, Laikipia, Samburu, and West Pocket show that not all insecurity is linked to terrorism. Some of it is tied to competition for land, water, and livestock. These conflicts often go unnoticed internationally, but they are real and deadly for the communities involved. In these regions, peace is fragile, shaped by natural resources, droughts, and community relations. The government regularly sends security operations to these areas, but the cycle of conflict still continues, revealing another side of Kenya's peace, one that is uneven and deeply influenced by local issues. Yet even with all these challenges, Kenya manages to remain functional, organized, and relatively calm compared to the turmoil seen in many parts of Africa. Schools operate, businesses open daily, matatus run everywhere, and people go about their lives. Cities grow, industries rise, and the country continues to attract visitors, investors, and international organizations. This balance between stability and security challenges is what makes Kenya's story so complex. It is not a country drowning in chaos, nor is it a land free from danger. It is somewhere in between, fighting external threats, managing internal issues, and trying to build a safer future while carrying the weight of its past. For many Kenyans, peace is not defined by the absence of problems but by the resilience of the people. Life continues even after attacks, after protests, after crime reports. Communities rebuild, security forces respond, and society adapts. Kenya's peace is not the quiet, effortless peace seen in some nations with minimal threats. Instead, it is a peace earned through constant effort, vigilance, and the determination to keep moving forward despite the challenges. One of the deepest layers affecting Kenya's peace is its complex ethnic landscape. Kenya is home to more than 40 communities, each with its own language, culture, traditions, and proud history. This diversity is one of the country's greatest strengths, giving Kenya its rich identity, from the pastoralist life of the Maasai and Samburu, to the coastal Swahili culture, to the farming traditions of the Kikuyu, Kizii, Luya, and Kalenjin, to the fishing communities around Lake Victoria. Yet the same diversity that makes Kenya vibrant has, at moments, become a source of tension and division. And this tension plays a major role in shaping how peaceful the country really is. For most Kenyans, ethnic identity is not something they think about every day. People live side by side in cities, trade with each other, intermarry, and work together. In places like Nairobi, Nakuru, Eldoret, and Mombasa, daily life often blends communities in ways that show harmony, not division. Children go to school together, colleagues cooperate in offices, and businesses thrive across ethnic lines. In fact, many Kenyans pride themselves on the ability to coexist with neighbors from any community. This everyday unity is a powerful form of peace, one that grows quietly in homes, markets, workplaces, and classrooms. But beneath this peaceful coexistence lies a more complicated history. During the colonial era and even after independence, land ownership, political power, and economic opportunities became closely tied to ethnicity. This created patterns of mistrust and competition that still influence the country today. Politics in Kenya often follows ethnic alliances, with leaders mobilizing support from their communities and citizens sometimes voting based on identity rather than policy. These patterns intensify during election seasons, when political speeches, rallies, and alliances awaken old wounds that people try so hard to forget. The most painful reminder of how ethnic tensions can threaten Kenya's peace came after the 2007 elections, when violence erupted between communities that had lived side by side for decades. Neighbor turned against neighbor, and villages burned as chaos spread. The memories of that period remain etched in the national consciousness. People do not like to speak about it, but the scars still exist. A quiet reminder that peace in Kenya can be fragile when ethnic identity becomes a tool for political competition. Since then, Kenya has worked hard to rebuild trust. The 2010 Constitution created new structures to promote unity, devolved government to reduce the feeling of exclusion, and strengthened institutions meant to protect citizens. Counties now have governors who come from different communities, giving regions more political voice and a sense of belonging. Interethnic marriages have increased, especially in cities. Young people, in particular, show signs of moving away from tribal politics, focusing more on jobs, opportunities, and development than on ethnic backgrounds. Many Kenyans today feel that they are simply Kenyan first, and anything else second. This shift represents a quiet, powerful form of social peace. But even with these positive changes, underlying tensions still surface from time to time. In some regions, especially where land is contested or where communities share borders, clashes can erupt. Not because people want conflict, but because historical grievances have never been fully resolved. Counties in the Rift Valley, northern regions, and parts of the coast sometimes experience ethnic disputes tied to resources, territory, or politics. These conflicts do not represent the whole nation, yet they remain a reminder that peace requires continuous effort. Comparing Kenya to other African countries reveals an interesting picture. Nations like Tanzania have managed ethnic diversity with remarkable success, largely because the country embraced Swahili identity early on, which helped unify communities. Rwanda, on the other hand, maintains peace through strict laws against ethnic divisions, creating harmony but limiting open political freedom. Nigeria struggles with deep ethnic and religious tensions that often lead to conflict, while Ethiopia's federal system has attempted to manage diversity but has instead triggered new waves of ethnic violence. In this continental context, Kenya sits somewhere in the middle. Not as harmonious as Tanzania, not as controlled as Rwanda, and not as polarized as Nigeria or Ethiopia. Kenya's diversity is both a blessing and a challenge, shaping the country's national identity in complicated ways. What makes Kenya unique is the resilience of its people. Even after tense political moments, Even after disputes or clashes, communities eventually find ways to rebuild relations. Markets reopen, schools resume, businesses recover, and people return to living together. Kenyans have an incredible ability to heal, to forgive, and to move forward. This resilience, this willingness to coexist despite differences, is one of the strongest foundations of Kenya's peace. At the same time, many Kenyans are aware that peace must be protected. Young people especially understand that the future of the country depends on reducing tribalism, strengthening justice, and creating opportunities that cut across ethnic lines. Music, sports, social media, and urban culture have played powerful roles in breaking down barriers. In Nairobi, for example, neighborhoods are filled with youth who speak Shang, a language that blends words from different communities and symbolizes the unity of a new generation. In this sense, Kenya's social peace is not defined only by the absence of conflict but by the everyday interactions that bring people together. So when we look at Kenya's ethnic landscape, we see both possibilities and challenges. The country is diverse, and that diversity sometimes creates tension. But it also builds connection, beauty, and strength. Kenya's peace, when viewed through the lens of ethnic relations, is not perfect, but it is alive, growing, and constantly evolving. And the true measure of peace is not whether a country has differences, but how it manages them. In this, Kenya continues to walk a delicate path, balancing unity and division, always trying to move a little closer to a nation where identity becomes a source of pride, not conflict. As the story of Kenya's place in Africa's peace landscape continues, one cannot ignore the powerful undercurrents of economic pressures and regional dynamics that quietly shape how peaceful a country truly feels. Kenya, often described as East Africa's economic engine, carries both the benefits and the burdens of being a regional hub. The buses and matatus that crowd Nairobi's streets, the traders in Gikamba Market, the busy Mombasa port, the bustling banks in Westlands. Everything seems to tell the world that Kenya is a country on the move. But beneath this motion lies a deeper question. Does economic activity guarantee peace, or can it mask tensions that simmer just below the surface? Kenya's economy has always been intertwined with peace, and many argue that its stability is one of the main reasons the country is considered more peaceful than many of its neighbors. Trade across the country depends on predictable conditions. Industries in Thika, the tea estates of Kericho, the flower farms of Naivasha, the tourism sector in the coast, all rely on the assumption that tomorrow will be calm. And for the most part, Kenya has managed to maintain this calm enough to keep investors comfortable. Compared to countries like South Sudan, where conflict repeatedly shatters development, or Zimbabwe, where economic instability fuels social tension, Kenya often appears as an oasis of relative predictability. Yet, economic stability alone does not paint the full picture. Kenya also faces huge internal pressures: youth unemployment, rising cost of living, inflation, heavy taxation, and a growing gap between the rich and the poor. In many urban estates, you will hear ordinary Kenyans say that peace means nothing if life becomes too expensive. They speak of the struggle to buy food, the long search for jobs, the harsh reality that millions of young people finish school only to face a job market that cannot absorb them. These frustrations sometimes spill into the streets, leading to waves of protests that challenge the image of Kenya as a peaceful state. While Kenya has its economic challenges, comparing it with other African countries offers a new perspective. In Nigeria, millions face unpredictability due to insecurity, banditry, and insurgency, making daily economic activity a struggle. In Ethiopia, conflict has disrupted entire regions, affecting businesses and families alike. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, vast natural resources coexist with cycles of violence that keep the economy unstable. And in countries like Sudan, economic collapse goes hand in hand with armed conflict, creating a devastating cycle. Against such comparisons, Kenya's economic struggles, though real, often seem manageable, and the country still stands as one of the more economically stable nations in Africa. Another element that influences Kenya's peace status is its strategic regional position. Kenya sits in a complicated neighborhood. To the north lies Ethiopia, which has seen internal conflict. To the west lies Uganda, which experiences episodes of political tension. To the northwest is South Sudan, a nation still recovering from years of civil war, and to the east lies Somalia, long affected by instability and terrorism. In many ways, Kenya's geography forces it to remain vigilant. Terrorist threats from al-Shabaab spill across the Somali border, influencing Kenya's internal security decisions. Instability in South Sudan affects the refugee numbers flowing through Kakuma and other camps. Even political shifts in Uganda or Ethiopia affect trade routes, diplomacy, and regional cooperation. Despite these challenges, Kenya has positioned itself as a mediator, a country that hosts peace talks, provides sanctuary during conflicts, and offers a stable ground for diplomacy. From Sudanese negotiations to Somali political processes, Kenya has repeatedly played a role in helping restore calm in the region. This diplomatic identity enhances Kenya's image as a peaceful nation, even when internal tensions arise. But these regional responsibilities come with costs. Increased military presence at borders, higher security expenditures, and the constant surveillance against extremism create a sense of guarded peace. Kenya often finds itself balancing between protecting its territory and maintaining its reputation as an open, welcoming nation. Compared to countries like Rwanda, which maintains strict internal control to preserve stability, or Tanzania, which experiences long stretches of calm but less regional involvement, Kenya's peace is more dynamic, constantly tested, yet consistently rebuilt. So, when one asks whether Kenya is truly the most peaceful country in Africa, the economic and regional dimensions tell a complex story. Kenya is peaceful enough to grow, to trade, to host, and to lead, but also restless enough to protest, to debate, and to push for better governance. Its peace is neither perfect nor fragile. It is a living, evolving condition shaped by daily choices, regional realities, and the patience of its people. And as long as Kenya remains the heartbeat of East Africa's economy and diplomacy, the question of its peace will continue to be influenced by factors far beyond its own borders. As the journey of understanding Kenya's peaceful identity continues, it becomes impossible to ignore the heartbeat of the nation, the people themselves. Kenya's peace is not built only on security forces or government policies. It is built on the everyday interactions between communities, the shared histories, the cultural diversity, and the silent agreements that hold the society together. Kenya is a country of more than 40 ethnic groups, each with its own story, traditions, and aspirations. And in a continent where ethnic divisions have triggered devastating conflicts, like the genocide in Rwanda or tribal wars in South Sudan, Kenya's ability to coexist, despite its differences, becomes a powerful chapter in its peace narrative. Every Kenyan knows that ethnicity plays a major role in politics, identity, and social belonging. During election seasons, these identities can turn into sources of tension. The memories of the 2007 to 2008 post-election violence still linger in the minds of many. The empty streets, the burning houses, the lives lost, and the deep wounds that took years to heal. That dark chapter remains one of Kenya's most painful reminders of how fragile peace can become when political tensions exploit ethnic loyalties. Yet, what is remarkable is how the country managed to come back together afterwards. Communities rebuilt their neighborhoods, the government introduced reforms, and Kenyans collectively agreed that such an experience should never be repeated. But peace is not simply about the absence of fighting. It is about the presence of understanding. In markets across the country, from Kisumu to Meru, from Garissa to Nakuru, you will see people from different backgrounds trading, laughing, arguing, and living side by side. You'll find Kikuyus running shops in Western Kenya, Lohayas working in Nairobi industries, Somalis building business empires, Kalenjins farming the Rift Valley, and Luo fishermen supplying markets across the country. This everyday interaction creates an invisible network of unity, one that political tensions may shake, but rarely break completely. Compared to other African nations, Kenya's social fabric shows both strengths and weaknesses. In Rwanda, the government maintains peace through strict laws and strong state control, ensuring unity but sacrificing some freedoms. In Nigeria, ethnic and religious divisions sometimes erupt into violent clashes, especially in the northern states. In Ethiopia, ethnic federalism has at times fueled large-scale tensions between regions. Against such a backdrop, Kenya's diversity, though challenging, often demonstrates resilience. Kenyans argue passionately online, debate issues openly, criticize leaders boldly, yet still share spaces, businesses, and dreams. Religion also plays a key role in shaping Kenya's peace. The country is predominantly Christian, with significant Muslim communities along the coast and in the northeastern regions. What stands out is the level of coexistence between these groups, especially considering the global tensions between religious communities. Churches and mosques often stand within the same neighborhoods. Interfaith dialogues are common, and in many families, people marry across religious lines without societal rejection. This level of tolerance differs sharply from countries like Nigeria, where religious differences have sparked serious conflicts, or Mali, where extremist groups have targeted communities based on religious identity. However, Kenya's social peace is not without its challenges. Online spaces, especially social media, have become new battlegrounds for political and ethnic debates. During moments of national tension, such as elections, high-profile corruption cases, or major policy changes, these platforms explode with heated discussions that sometimes deepen divisions. Although these digital conflicts rarely turn into physical violence, they show how fragile unity can be in a fast-changing world. Urbanization adds another layer to the story. Cities like Nairobi, Mombasa, Eldoret, and Kisumu attract thousands of people every week in search of work and opportunity. The blending of cultures in urban estates like Githurai, Umoja, Embakasi, and Mtwapa creates environments where new forms of identity emerge. Identities less tied to tribe and more tied to lifestyle, hustle, and survival. This urban melting pot strengthens peace by reducing isolation between communities. But it also creates pressure on housing, transport, and social services, leading to frustrations that occasionally burst into protests or crime. Still, somewhere in the hearts of Kenyans lies a strong preference for stability. For many families, peace is not an abstract concept. It is the assurance that children can go to school, that businesses can open tomorrow, that roads will remain safe, and that life can continue without fear. This desire for normalcy is perhaps Kenya's greatest shield against internal conflict. It is what pulls the country back together after disagreements, what restores calm after protests, and what keeps communities talking even when politics tries to pull them apart. Thus, when we ask whether Kenya is truly the most peaceful nation in Africa, the social lens presents a complex but inspiring picture. Kenya's peace is not perfect, but it is deeply rooted in the lived experiences of people who choose coexistence over conflict, conversation over confrontation, and hope over division. It is a peace tested by elections, by economic pressure, by regional threats, and by the weight of history, yet it still stands strong. And perhaps that resilience, more than anything else, is what makes Kenya's peace unique on the African continent. As the story of Kenya's peace unfolds further, the role of political culture becomes impossible to ignore. The rhythms of Kenyan politics, vibrant, noisy, emotional, and sometimes tense, play a major part in shaping how peaceful the country feels at any given moment. Politics in Kenya is not a quiet affair. It is debated in homes, in matatus, in village squares, on television panels, on the streets, and especially on social media. Every election cycle becomes a national conversation that touches every corner of the country. And while this political energy shows the strength of democracy, it also reveals the fine line Kenya walks between spirited participation and simmering tension. Kenya has built a reputation as one of Africa's most politically active nations. Campaigns stretch across months, rallies attract thousands, and leaders travel from town to town promising change, progress, and unity. This political freedom is something not all African countries enjoy. In places like Eritrea or Equatorial Guinea, political expression is heavily controlled. In others, such as Sudan or Chad, military influence overshadows civilian leadership. Kenya, by contrast, has maintained a system where opposition voices, activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens can challenge authority without the country collapsing into chaos. This openness contributes to peace, but it also means disagreements are frequent, loud, and sometimes emotional. The leadership structure in Kenya, rooted in its constitution, also shapes its peace. Devolution, introduced in 2010, gave counties more control over their own resources, reducing some of the tensions that once arose from centralized power. Governors now manage local development, and county assemblies debate issues that affect people directly. This shift helped calm areas that previously felt neglected. It also made leadership more accessible, which improves the relationship between citizens and the government. When people feel heard, they are less likely to resort to violence. In comparison, countries without decentralized systems often struggle with concentrated power that fuels resentment. However, Kenyan politics is still influenced by long-standing patterns. Ethnic alliances continue to play a major role, and political leaders often rely on their communities for support. This dynamic is not unique to Kenya. It is seen across Africa. In Nigeria, regional and ethnic identities shape elections. In Ethiopia, ethnic federalism defines the political map. In South Africa, inequality and historical divisions influence political discussions. But what makes Kenya different is how these identities, despite causing friction, rarely break the country completely. Even when political rivalry intensifies, as seen in the repeat presidential election of 2017 or the nationwide protests of 2023, the country has repeatedly managed to step back from the edge. The presence of strong institutions is another factor. Kenya's judiciary, though often criticized, has shown independence in critical moments, including the historic annulment of a presidential election. The media remains vibrant and investigative, exposing corruption and giving a voice to the public. Civil society organizations monitor government actions, advocate for human rights, and push for reforms. These institutions act as pressure valves, preventing political frustration from boiling over. In countries where institutions are weaker, political disputes often escalate into violent conflict, but Kenya's systems, imperfect as they are, help maintain balance. At the same time, Kenya's political tension cannot be dismissed. Protests, especially over the cost of living or election results, regularly challenge the country's image of calm. Streets fill with demonstrators demanding accountability, while police respond with force that sometimes leads to clashes. These moments reveal that Kenya's peace is not silent. It is negotiated. It is debated in parliament, contested in courts, shouted in rallies, and defended by activists. Peace is not just a gift. It is something Kenya continues to work for every day. Political dialogue plays a crucial role in this balancing act. Throughout Kenya's history, when tensions peak, leaders often come together to negotiate. The handshake between President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga in 2018 is one of the most iconic examples, a moment that restored calm after months of post-election tension. This culture of dialogue sets Kenya apart from many African nations where political disagreements lead to coups, armed rebellion, or prolonged instability. Kenya chooses negotiation over confrontation, compromise over collapse. Yet, the country's stability also depends on citizens themselves. Kenyans, despite frustrations, often choose peace because they have seen what instability looks like. They have read about conflicts in neighboring countries, watched how civil war destroys economies, and witnessed how violence can erase years of progress. The collective memory of the 2007 to 2008 crisis still urges many to avoid a return to that darkness. This shared responsibility, this silent promise to protect the nation, is one of the strongest forces holding Kenya together. So, when one tries to answer whether Kenya is truly the most peaceful country in Africa, the political lens reveals an intriguing balance. Kenya's peace is not calm like Botswana's, nor is it enforced like Rwanda's. It is not fragile like Somalia's or unpredictable like Nigeria's. Instead, Kenya's peace is dynamic, shaped by heated debates, strong institutions, active citizens, and leaders who eventually find common ground. It is a peace that bends under pressure but refuses to break, a peace built not on silence but on conversation. And in that unique blend of disagreement and resilience lies the real political strength that keeps Kenya standing. As the exploration of Kenya's peace journeys deeper, attention turns to a group that often stands in the shadows of national conversations, yet plays one of the most decisive roles in shaping stability: the security forces. Kenya's peace is not only maintained by the goodwill of its citizens or the strength of its institutions. It rests heavily on the men and women in uniform who patrol its streets, guard its borders, prevent attacks, and respond to unrest. Without their presence, the calm that Kenya projects to the world would look very different. The Kenya Police Service, the Administration Police, the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, the General Service Unit, the military, and the intelligence service each form part of a complex security architecture designed to keep the nation stable. Their work, largely unseen, determines whether threats turn into crises or disappear quietly in the night. Kenya's position as a regional hub, its open borders, its busy highways, and its large cities demand a level of preparedness that few countries in Africa can maintain. And while the public often sees only the visible moments, officers on patrol, police responding to protests, security checkpoints in malls. Much of Kenya's peace is forged in intelligence rooms, surveillance centers, military camps, and quiet border posts far from the spotlight. Comparatively, Kenya's security forces operate under tougher conditions than many African nations. Countries like Botswana or Namibia face limited external threats and smaller internal pressures. Rwanda maintains order through highly centralized control, while countries like Somalia or the Democratic Republic of Congo contend with large-scale insecurity that overwhelms their security structures. Kenya, however, stands somewhere in the middle, a nation that faces real threats but has built a disciplined, coordinated response system capable of containing them. One of the most significant challenges Kenya faces comes from terrorism. The threat posed by Al-Shabaab has shaped the country's security strategies for over a decade. From the Westgate Mall attack to Garissa University, from Lamu County raids to sporadic attacks in Mandera, terrorism has attempted to destabilize Kenya's sense of normalcy. In response, intelligence and military units have been forced to evolve rapidly. Specialized counterterrorism squads, border patrols, digital surveillance, and regional military operations have become part of daily life in the security sector. It is this silent, continuous vigilance that prevents many attacks before the public ever hears about them. At the same time, Kenya's internal policing plays a crucial role in maintaining peace, especially during politically sensitive periods. Election years place enormous pressure on the police, testing their ability to balance the right to protest with the need to maintain order. The streets of Nairobi, Kisumu, Mombasa, Eldoret, and other towns have witnessed moments where demonstrations escalate into clashes. These incidents often draw criticism, sometimes justified, sometimes politicized, but they also show the delicate line security forces must walk. In countries like Ethiopia, protests have in the past escalated into widespread violence. In South Africa, riots have caused massive destruction. In Nigeria, security crackdowns during protests have sparked global controversy. Kenya, despite its tense moments, often finds a way back to calm quicker than many expect. The military, too, plays an important stabilizing role. Beyond its operations in Somalia under AMISOM, now ATMIS, the Kenya Defense Forces protect key infrastructure, monitor borders, and support civil authorities when necessary. Their professionalism is recognized across the region, contributing to Kenya's image as a stable and capable state. This reputation not only deters external threats but also positions Kenya as a trusted partner in African peacekeeping missions, reinforcing its identity as a nation committed to stability. However, peace maintained by force alone cannot be the full story. Kenya's security sector faces criticisms, concerns over police brutality, cases of corruption, slow response times in some regions, and perceptions of bias in enforcement. These issues spark public debate and sometimes fuel mistrust. But compared to countries where security forces operate with minimal accountability or where the state collapses entirely during crises, Kenya's system still manages to function, adapt, and reform with time. Community policing and local intelligence networks are another major reason Kenya avoids large-scale internal conflict. In rural areas and urban estates alike, chiefs, elders, residents' associations, and local leaders act as bridges between the public and the police. This form of grassroots security, unique in its cultural grounding, helps prevent small disputes from escalating, monitors strangers entering local communities, and alerts authorities of suspicious activity. Many African nations depend solely on formal security forces, but Kenya's use of both formal and traditional systems provides a buffer that quietly strengthens peace. Even more subtle is the role of the National Intelligence Service, an institution rarely discussed publicly but deeply influential in maintaining stability. From monitoring extremist recruitment to detecting political plots that could destabilize the country, intelligence operations often prevent crises long before anyone notices. In nations where intelligence agencies are weak or highly politicized, unrest often grows unchecked. Kenya's intelligence system, though not perfect, remains one of the most effective in East Africa. Through this lens, peace in Kenya becomes less of a passive condition and more of an active effort. It is something defended daily through surveillance, training, intelligence reports, patrols, and rapid responses. It is a peace that requires constant maintenance, strategic foresight, and coordination between institutions that must work together despite political and social pressures. And while this peace may not be flawless, it is practical, resilient, and capable of withstanding pressures that might break other nations. So, when questioning whether Kenya is truly the most peaceful country in Africa, the answer becomes clearer through the role of its security forces. Kenya's peace is not accidental. It is engineered, protected, and continually renewed by systems that operate both in silence and in public view. It is a peace built through sacrifice, discipline, and vigilance. A peace that faces threats yet refuses to crumble. And a peace that stands as one of the country's strongest pillars in a volatile region. Another critical dimension of Kenya's peace lies in the vibrancy of its civil society and the freedom of expression enjoyed by its citizens. Peace is not just the absence of violence or conflict. It is also the presence of active public discourse, robust institutions, and a society where people can voice concerns without fear of immediate repression. Kenya, in this regard, stands out in East Africa. Citizens debate politics openly on social media, in town halls, in newspapers, on radio stations, and across television panels. Activists call out corruption, demand accountability, and advocate for human rights, often without the extreme fear seen in more authoritarian states. Take Uganda, for instance, where political activists and journalists face arrests, intimidation, or exile if they speak against the government. Or Eritrea, where media is heavily controlled, leaving citizens with very limited avenues to express dissent. In Kenya, by contrast, although challenges remain, journalists investigate freely, bloggers comment on government policies, and protests occur regularly. Even though clashes sometimes erupt, this level of civil participation strengthens the country's resilience. Peace in Kenya is not imposed silently by fear. It is negotiated continuously through dialogue, debate, and public scrutiny. This is a hallmark of a more mature and participatory society, compared to nations where repression hides instability rather than resolves it. Kenya's media also plays a critical role in shaping perception and reality. Newspapers like Daily Nation and The Standard, radio stations across the country, and television networks provide platforms where citizens can hold leaders accountable. Even Tuko, Kenyans.co.ke, and other digital outlets have grown as voices of the people. Compared to countries like Somalia, where conflict limits media operations, or Zimbabwe, where media is often restricted, Kenya's media freedom fosters a sense of transparency and accountability. It allows grievances to surface early, giving the government and institutions a chance to respond before tensions escalate into violence. Civil society organizations further contribute to Kenya's stability. NGOs, community-based organizations, and advocacy groups monitor elections, provide civic education, mediate community disputes, and support vulnerable populations. This layer of social oversight strengthens resilience in ways that countries with weak civil structures struggle to achieve. For example, in Mali or South Sudan, weak civil society structures mean that disputes, political, ethnic, or economic, often escalate into prolonged violence. In Kenya, even when protests or riots occur, there are mechanisms, both formal and informal, that allow issues to be resolved without widespread destruction. Education also intersects with civil society to influence peace. Kenya boasts one of the highest literacy rates in East Africa, enabling citizens to engage in informed debates and participate in civic activities. Compare this to nations like Niger or Chad, where lower literacy levels often limit public participation, and you can see how education directly correlates with social stability. A well-informed citizenry is more capable of resisting manipulation, less likely to resort to violence, and more able to demand accountability from leaders. Yet, Kenya's civil society is not perfect. Social media has sometimes amplified hate speech, tribal tension, and disinformation, especially during election periods. Protests over government policies occasionally escalate into clashes, revealing the fragile edge of freedom when paired with high emotion and inequality. But even these challenges are a form of proof. Kenyans are testing the boundaries of freedom in ways that other countries cannot, demonstrating a living negotiation of peace rather than its mere absence. When we zoom out to look at Africa as a whole, Kenya's civil liberties place it in a relatively favorable position. It is more open than Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda in terms of citizen engagement. It is safer than conflict zones like Somalia, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. It is not as economically burdened or politically suppressed as Zimbabwe. In short, Kenya's peace is strengthened by the ability of its citizens to act, speak, and organize, an invisible but powerful layer that underpins the country's stability. Through civil society, media, and freedom of expression, Kenya manages to create a balance. Citizens can voice dissatisfaction, demand justice, and push for reform without necessarily resorting to violence. This dynamic process of negotiation, accountability, and civic engagement is a major reason why Kenya remains comparatively peaceful in a continent often challenged by war, repression, and instability. Peace here is not static. It is lived, experienced, and actively maintained every day by ordinary Kenyans who choose dialogue over destruction. Another crucial dimension of Kenya's identity as a peaceful nation lies in its regional and international influence. Kenya is not just an observer of African affairs. It is often a key player in shaping stability across the continent. Its diplomatic engagement, peacekeeping contributions, and role as a mediator in conflicts demonstrate that peace within Kenya is deeply connected to peace beyond its borders. In many ways, the country's stability enables it to act as a stabilizing force in East Africa and beyond. Kenya's geographic position, bordering Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Somalia, places it at the crossroads of regional politics, trade, and conflict. In Somalia, decades of civil war and the persistent threat of al-Shabaab have created insecurity that easily spills across the border. Kenya's interventions in Somalia, through military operations and regional cooperation under AMISOM and now ATMIS, reflect a proactive approach to containing threats before they destabilize the wider region. Few African countries can combine military readiness, political engagement, and international cooperation as Kenya does. Compare this with Uganda, whose interventions are often more localized, or Tanzania, which maintains a peaceful domestic posture but limited involvement in neighboring conflicts. Kenya's approach is active, sometimes risky, but fundamentally aimed at regional stability. Beyond military engagement, Kenya has positioned itself as a mediator in diplomatic crises. It has hosted peace talks for South Sudan, mediated political disputes in Somalia, and facilitated dialogue in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This reputation as a hub for negotiation relies on the perception of Kenya as relatively stable, capable of hosting difficult conversations, and willing to provide neutral ground. Other African countries, like Ethiopia or Rwanda, often engage in diplomacy, but either internal conflicts or strict political controls limit their regional influence. Kenya, despite its challenges, combines openness, infrastructure, and regional respect to serve as a go-to mediator. Economic diplomacy further strengthens Kenya's peace narrative. The country is East Africa's largest trade hub, thanks to Mombasa Port, Nairobi's financial center, and its position along major trade corridors. Stability attracts investment from multinational corporations, development agencies, and international organizations. Investors are more likely to enter a nation that balances internal peace with regional influence. Compare this to conflict-affected states like South Sudan, Somalia, or parts of the Sahel, where trade is disrupted daily or Zimbabwe, where economic mismanagement and political unrest deter long-term investment. Kenya's relative calm, therefore, is both a cause and effect of its regional economic role. International partnerships amplify this impact. Kenya hosts United Nations offices, diplomatic missions, and multilateral forums that bring African leaders together. Its engagement in the African Union, East African Community, and other regional bodies shows that the country is not passive but actively shaping continental agendas. Peace in Kenya allows the country to exert this influence. Conversely, instability would immediately undermine its credibility. This duality illustrates a unique aspect of Kenyan peace. It is both domestic and outward-facing, tied to national safety as well as international perception. Yet, Kenya's regional role also creates pressures. Hosting refugees from Somalia, South Sudan, and other conflict zones tests local resources, infrastructure, and social cohesion. While Kenya's cities, especially Kakuma and Dadaab, have adapted to large refugee populations, these situations require constant management to prevent localized tensions. Few African countries face this combination of responsibility, managing internal peace while simultaneously supporting regional stability. It is a balancing act that Kenya handles better than most, but it also reminds citizens that peace is an ongoing effort, not a static achievement. In contrast to countries like Botswana or Namibia, which enjoy long-term domestic peace but limited regional crises, Kenya's stability is constantly tested by its surroundings. In comparison with nations like Nigeria or the Democratic Republic of Congo, where internal challenges often overwhelm regional diplomacy, Kenya manages to maintain a credible role on the international stage. This dual capacity, protecting internal peace while contributing to regional stability, is rare in Africa and a major factor in why Kenya is often cited as one of the continent's more peaceful nations. Ultimately, Kenya's peace is not just the absence of conflict within its borders. It is reinforced by its capacity to influence, intervene, and mediate in its neighborhood. Its military, diplomatic, and economic engagement ensure that instability elsewhere does not immediately threaten domestic calm. Kenya's stability becomes a tool, a shield, and a source of leverage, demonstrating that peace is not simply passive but strategic. And in this way, Kenya's relative tranquility in Africa is both earned and reinforced by its active participation in shaping the continent's future. Even as Kenya stands out as relatively peaceful compared to many African nations, the country's peace is not without challenges. Underneath the surface of calm lies a delicate balance that requires constant maintenance. Natural disasters, economic inequality, political tension, terrorism, ethnic divisions, and social pressures all act as potential stress points. Understanding these threats is essential to grasp the full picture of Kenya's peacefulness. And it is here that the fragility of Kenya's calm becomes visible. One of the persistent threats is political tension. Every election season in Kenya brings a surge of anxiety. The 2007 to 2008 post-election violence is a stark reminder of how quickly political disagreements can escalate. Even in more recent elections, protests, court challenges, and political rallies have tested the country's resilience. Compared to Botswana, where elections are generally peaceful and uncontroversial, Kenya's democratic process carries inherent risks. Yet, unlike countries such as Nigeria, where contested elections sometimes trigger nationwide unrest, or Ethiopia, where political disputes have escalated into armed conflict, Kenya has developed systems, courts, mediation, and negotiation to absorb tension without collapse. Economic inequality also represents a quiet but persistent threat. While Kenya has one of East Africa's largest economies, the wealth is unevenly distributed. Urban slums, rural poverty, and youth unemployment fuel frustration. When people feel excluded from economic progress, social unrest becomes more likely. Countries like South Africa show how inequality can generate recurring protests and riots. Kenya faces similar pressures, though they rarely reach the same intensity. The economic stress interacts with politics, ethnicity, and social dynamics, creating a web of potential instability that must be carefully managed. Terrorism remains a tangible challenge. Al-Shabaab continues to operate along the Somalia-Kenya border, occasionally carrying out attacks in urban areas like Nairobi and Mombasa. While Kenya's security forces have been largely successful in preventing large-scale terrorist activity, the threat never fully disappears. Compare this to Tanzania, which has faced fewer direct terrorist attacks, or Rwanda, where tight security and strong governance have minimized extremist threats. Kenya's position as both a regional economic hub and a border neighbor to conflict zones means vigilance is perpetual. Ethnic and social divisions are another challenge. Although many Kenyans live harmoniously across communities, historical grievances over land, political representation, and resources occasionally flare up into localized conflict. The Rift Valley, parts of the coast, and northern regions have experienced such tensions. Countries like Nigeria or Ethiopia have struggled with ethnic federalism or religious divides that regularly erupt into violence. Kenya, while far from immune, has mechanisms, local administration, peace committees, and civic interventions that often prevent disputes from escalating nationwide. Still, the potential exists for tensions to intensify, especially if manipulated during elections or amplified by social media. Urban pressures further complicate peace. Cities like Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, and Eldoret face overcrowding, strained infrastructure, unemployment, and informal settlements. Urban unrest can spark quickly, as seen in protests related to cost of living or service delivery. In comparison, smaller or more rural African nations may face less intense urban stress, while countries with poorly managed cities, such as parts of Sudan or DR Congo, see unrest quickly spiral into broader conflict. Kenya's urban centers remain a pressure point, requiring careful governance to sustain peace. Finally, climate and environmental factors introduce additional risk. Droughts, floods, and other natural disasters disproportionately affect rural populations, often worsening poverty and sparking migration to cities. In pastoralist regions, competition over water and grazing land occasionally triggers clashes between communities. Nations like Somalia or South Sudan experience similar patterns, but with far more devastating consequences. In Kenya, while disasters are serious, coordinated government and NGO responses have often prevented crises from becoming large-scale violence, demonstrating resilience but also the delicate nature of peace. Taken together, these challenges highlight that Kenya's peace is neither absolute nor guaranteed. It is a living balance, constantly shaped by political decisions, economic conditions, social cohesion, and regional dynamics. Compared to countries torn by civil war or authoritarian suppression, Kenya fares well. But compared to nations with long-term structural stability, like Botswana or Namibia, Kenya's peace remains fragile and dependent on the continuous engagement of citizens, leaders, and institutions. Kenya's ability to maintain stability despite these pressures is remarkable. Protests occur, economic frustrations exist, and threats linger, but the nation absorbs shocks that might destabilize other African countries. Peace here is dynamic, negotiated daily through politics, diplomacy, security, social cohesion, and civic engagement. It is this constant effort, this ongoing management of risks, that makes Kenya's peace real, but also a delicate achievement, reminding observers that peace is never permanent. It must be actively maintained and defended. As we reach the final chapter of this journey, it becomes clear that Kenya's peace is a story of resilience, complexity, and ongoing effort. From its vibrant civil society to its active security forces, from the diversity of its people to the pressures of politics and the economy, Kenya demonstrates that peace is not simply the absence of conflict. It is the presence of systems, relationships, and practices that allow society to function amid challenges. When compared to other African nations, Kenya occupies a unique position. Countries like Botswana and Namibia enjoy calm and predictability, but face less internal pressure and fewer regional threats. Nations like Rwanda maintain strict peace through centralized control, often limiting freedoms in the process. Nigeria, Ethiopia, and South Sudan, by contrast, grapple with ethnic, political, and economic tensions that frequently erupt into large-scale violence. Kenya sits somewhere in the middle. It is not perfectly calm, nor is it fragile to the point of collapse. It is dynamic, resilient, and constantly evolving, a nation that negotiates its peace every day through civic engagement, political dialogue, social cohesion, and regional diplomacy. Kenya's ability to withstand shocks, whether from terrorism, economic inequality, political tension, or ethnic disputes, demonstrates a maturity that few African nations possess. Its people, institutions, and regional influence combine to create a stability that allows life to continue, business to thrive, and communities to coexist, even under pressure. The nation's history shows moments of crisis, but it also shows remarkable capacity for recovery, reconciliation, and renewal. Yet, Kenya's story is not finished. The peace we see today is fragile, requiring constant attention from citizens, leaders, and institutions alike. The future will demand continued vigilance, addressing economic inequality, managing political competition peacefully, reducing ethnic tensions, and adapting to regional and global pressures. The nation's next chapter will depend on how well Kenyans continue to balance these forces, build stronger institutions, and nurture a culture of unity and dialogue. In the end, is Kenya truly the peaceful country in Africa? The answer is both yes and no. Yes, because it maintains a level of stability, openness, and resilience that many African nations aspire to achieve. No, because it faces real challenges that can test this peace at any moment. What makes Kenya remarkable is that it continues to navigate this balance, learning from its history, leveraging its strengths, and quietly building a society where differences can coexist and conflict can be contained. If you've followed this journey through Kenya's politics, social fabric, economy, security, and regional role, you've seen that peace is not a static label. It is a living achievement. And that is the story of Kenya, a nation that demonstrates that peace is not just given, but earned, maintained, and constantly negotiated. Thank you for watching this exploration of Kenya and its unique position in Africa. If you found this story insightful and want to see more in-depth analyses like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter and exploring the truth behind the headlines. Kenya's peace is complex, imperfect, and inspiring, and together, we can continue uncovering the realities behind Africa's most fascinating nations.